The question I've been asked is actually quite a simple one. Is now a good time to buy an EV? So I started doing some research. I've learned so much whilst I've been doing that research, and I thought I'd share it with you. And I think we can, together bust some of the myths surrounding EVs, together with calculating the true cost of moving to an EV right now for me using my own calculations. I'm also going to share with you new technology and ways of avoiding EVs altogether whilst emitting zero greenhouse gases, meaning EVs could become optional. Now, that'd be an interesting thing, wouldn't it? You might not have to ever buy an EV. More on that later, together with a cool way of running some incredible engine cars into the future, not have to worry about moving to an EV at all, so you can actually have a petrol engine car, never have to worry about having to have any of the penalties that go with not running an EV moving forwards. But more on that later. Welcome to the T-Junction, I'm Jats. It's January 2025 and after 7 weeks I'm 95% recovered from the devil of all viruses. Well, that's the reason why there's been no new episodes, and I'm really sorry about that. But there's lots and lots in the pipeline for 2025, so please subscribe if you haven't done so to see what we're up to. In this jam-packed episode, we look at things like CO2 emissions, why car makers are giving massive discounts on brand new electric vehicles. We're going to look at the impact of car building on the economy, why the government needs us to buy new cars. We're going to look at the state of public charging in the UK. We're going to look at legislation from the EU and from our own government here in the UK too. And we touch on the perceived barriers that stop people from moving to an EV in the first place. Now, I've always said that I will only move to an EV when I'm forced to do so, and that's because I love the beating heart. I love the engine. The engine gives the car a character and a soul that an electric vehicle just doesn't possess as far as I'm concerned. But if I was in the market for a new car right now, what should I do? I've heard about things like the government legislation banning the sale of engine cars soon. So if I was going to change a car right now, am I being forced into an electric vehicle? Now, I'd like to change my car in the next 12 months or so the timing of this question couldn't be better. We've owned the car that we have right now that we're thinking of changing for a long time, longer than any of the other 30 cars that I have actually owned in my life. In fact, so many other cars have come and gone whilst we've owned it. It's been totally reliable and is a genuine member of the family, like a pet dog, you could say. So could it really work for me as well? So let's just look at the background to all of this. Now, bear with me on this because it all comes together to build a really, really good understanding of whether or not now is a good time to get an EV and whether it can actually work for you. Let's start with CO2 emissions, okay? Now, rising CO2 has always been sold as a #1 factor causing climate change, with lots of scientific evidence to actually back that up. So we shouldn't really refute that or dispute that in any way. But how much of that is because of cars, and what impact does car production have on it? Well, the international scientific consensus is that global net human-caused emissions of carbon dioxide need to fall by about 45% from the levels that were recorded in 2010 by 2030, reaching net zero around 2050. Now, this would be in order to prevent the worst climate impact. Now, you can find this information and the documentation surrounding this on the netzeroclimate.org website. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. It really is worth going in there to have a look to see what's going on in the world. Now, I've read a really interesting article from Auto Express on CO2 emissions. It's a very, very complex area, and I'm sure there have been some assumptions made along the way. But the link to the article is in the description of this video. And again, it's one of those ones that I'd recommend you go and have a look at. But in summary though, what it says is that the amount of CO2 created when making a brand new engine car, and that's petrol or diesel, is around 5.5 tonnes. Now that compares to 8.8 tonnes for a new EV, of which almost 50% is just for the battery alone. So if you have a hybrid that's got both battery and engine, my man math sort of tells me it could be 10 tonnes or even more. It's not really mentioned specifically in the article, but you can sort of read into it or read between the lines. Now for batteries, of course, there are rare earthly materials which have to be excavated, in some cases processed actually in country or shipped to somewhere else where they have to be processed, and that could be in a different continent. Then the battery is actually produced or built, it's built into a car, shipped again, shipped in the middle somewhere as well. You just don't know what's going to go on, and before you know it, you could find that a car with a battery in it has actually been shipped to 1, 2, 3, 4 continents before it's even available or for sale. So that is quite a heavy impact and a heavy burden, if you like, in terms of CO2 emissions. So on the face of it, shouldn't we all be taking steps to produce less cars generally anyway, especially EVs if they are harmful to the environment? And especially, I've got to say this, hybrid vehicles, which could be classed as being the worst evil of them all. Every car that's on the road right now has already subjected the planet to the manufacturing emissions of CO2, which is a huge chunk of CO2 in the production of a vehicle, and it's a one hit during the life cycle of the vehicle. So the longer you run existing cars, the fewer cars will be made down the line, surely. So isn't it better to just run cars for longer? Well, the article states that EVs produce 25% less CO2 over their lifetime. It's 18 tonnes as opposed to 24 tonnes for a petrol or a diesel engine car. But does it include, though, the CO2 from fossil-fueled power stations, or did they assume that the technology that was providing the electricity for a battery electric vehicle was coming from renewables? We just don't know. It doesn't actually clarify that in there. And then what about CO2 for extracting oil, refining it, making petrol, shipping it around the world before it actually ends up at a pump? Well, it only touches on things like that, and it only touches on things like recycling at the end of the life cycle of a car. And it states measuring all of the pollutants produced over an individual car's lifetime is tricky, and I think that's the key thing. They will have made some assumptions in this. So you have to take these articles with the proverbial salt, but they do give you some rationale, some background as to why all of this is happening and what the impact of it really is. I guess it's important. So what's the UK's impact on global CO2? If I was to ask you what that would you be able to give me a guess even? Well, I'll tell you what it is. The UK produces 1% of global CO2 per annum. Now that's exactly within the realms of rounding up and rounding down in terms of error. It could get lost quite easily in that, and it's not going to stop polar bears from having a home. But road transport is 60% of that 1%. So 60% greenhouse gas emissions is essentially, within that 1%, and it comes all from transport. Now, there are 34 million cars registered on the road in the UK here, of which 1.4 million are electric vehicles, but that number is steadily rising. So reducing CO2 is a good thing for sure. I suppose ultimately it could save us from angry climate activists. Sorry, it could save us from climate change. That's what I meant to say. That's what I said. But if cars are bad for the environment, why do the Global Climate Accords not just ban the production of all new cars, full stop? Well, that's what the angry climate activists want. That's what climate activists want, don't they? Well, they do. That's exactly the kind of thing that they're actually aiming towards. The socio-economic benefits of car manufacture cannot be ignored. Car manufacture in the UK generates £46.8 billion worth of economic value add. It supports 552,000 jobs, and that's from just over 1 million cars and commercial vehicles that we produce each year here in the UK. Now, around 60% were exported from that 1 million that we made. It's also worth about 12% of all exports, so it's a massive win for the UK economy in that respect. But how does that compare with other countries then? Well, Germany and South Korea made around 4 to 4.2 million vehicles in 2023. India made 5.9 million. The USA and Japan made between 9 and 10 million vehicles in 2023. And China made a whopping 30 million vehicles in 2023. So you can just imagine how important car manufacturing is for, global economy. Now, there are huge amounts of investment going into China, really, by car manufacturers. No doubt, huge support from the government there too, because they recognise the importance of car manufacturing and what it does to their economy, what it does to their steel manufacturing and so on, because they've got all the supporting industries that are built around that. They've done a really good job there when you think about it. It's quite envious. So then I looked at GDP. Well, in the UK, car manufacturing accounts for around 2% of UK's GDP. It's around 3 to 5% in Japan, USA and Germany, 7% in India and South Korea, but a whopping 10% in China. 10% of China's GDP is attributed to car manufacture. That's a huge amount. So of course, governments want a healthy car making industry and will do what they can to protect it. So what is the makeup of EV sales compared to engine car sales in the UK in 2024? Well, in the UK, 1 in 10 cars that were sold to private individuals were EV, compared to businesses where the figure was 1 in 4. Now let's have a little look at Norway, which seems to have done really well. Did you know that 80% of all new car sales in Norway are electric? I mean, it just shows that we've got a long way to go. And there must be some barriers, clearly, as to what's stopping people from buying EVs in the UK. But what are those barriers? Now, most people who own EVs that I know really, really love them. One or two have reverted back to engined or hybrid cars, but not many have an EV as their only vehicle. In fact, quite a few have an engined car as well in the family somewhere. Now, are people skeptical of the technology or the government? Have people forgotten what's happened in the past? Remember diesels? We were all pushed into buying diesels. I was one of them. We went ahead and bought them. And then before you knew it, we were in PCP deals or finance deals or whatever. We'd sunk a lot of money into them. And then we were told, well, diesels are really bad for the environment. We're actually going to penalize you and we're going to put up fuel duty. And we all got stung by it. And there were people who were on lower incomes that had actually gone and made that change too, and then got stuck and trapped in that. But when we're talking about anxiety and we're talking about electric vehicles, are we also skeptical about other types of anxiety, like range anxiety, especially the impact of cold weather and what that might do in the winter? What about the accessibility to public charging networks? There are horror stories about reliability. We've seen those TikTok and whatever videos of batteries failing and exploding, catching fire and all that kind of stuff. And then what about cost of repairs? Because we keep getting told that batteries cost a fortune when they go wrong. And they are slightly more expensive to insure because, remember, these cars have a huge performance potential as well. Some of these were actually faster than supercars from not that long ago, and they're just family hatchbacks. Will they all end up with half the stated range in 10 years' time after the battery warranty has expired? And then, of course, resale values are very, very poor at the moment, and people know that. They actually see what cars are selling for. And then the government removing new EV grants for all but electric vans and wheelchair accessible vehicles, I don't think is a great thing either. The government really hasn't helped there at all. It's just not helpful. Or is it simply a bit of everything? Let me know in the comments what you think and why, you might have bought an engine car and not an EV if you've changed one recently. I'd love to know what your rationale for that was. Now, at the start of this video, I said I would try and bust some of the myths, so let's do some of those now. First of all, batteries. Well, they can be repaired rather than replaced. There are companies out there that will replace or repair individual modules for you or recondition the battery. The charging network is slowly improving, and we're going to talk about charging a little bit later in this video. The actual battery and motors do have a warranty, which is usually longer than a new standard car warranty of 3 years. It's normally anything up to about 10 years. And the government subsidies were for brand new cars. Well, there's such a big choice out there of electric vehicles on the used market that you can actually buy a nearly new one and save yourself an absolute fortune anyway. So why buy new? Now, of course, if they depreciate, and I talked about depreciation a minute ago, but if cars depreciate, why would you buy one with your own hard-earned cash? I mean, it's a depreciating asset anyway, but if it's going to depreciate really, really quickly, why wouldn't you just lease one or hire one or salary sacrifice it? I mean, how do these schemes even work? Well, incidentally, if you want to see how these things work, then please click on the link in the description of this video or just here on the screen, and you can actually go to a video where myself and one of my guests talk about things like depreciating assets, hire purchase agreements, PCP, leasing, how salary sacrifice works, and all of that. It's just a really interesting video, and I think you'll enjoy that, but it will be quite informative. So, what about second-hand EVs? Well, take-up isn't great there either. Car values for second-hand EVs have really plummeted. Just look at this BMW iX1. It's probably the sort of car that I might consider, which with just over 15,000 miles on the clock is getting towards 50% of its original price when it was new, and that was only 2 years ago. And then what about this Polestar 2 long-range model, which is about £48,000 new? It's less than 2 years old, 20,000 miles on the clock, it's only 15 miles away from where I live, and it's £23,000. It just seems like an absolute bargain. It's going to have a great warranty on it. It makes a lot of sense, but people aren't buying them. I guess if I'm in the market to buy one of these, then you've got to sort of really consider that every cloud has a silver lining, and this is exactly that. I mean, do people just view them as some kind of electrical appliance? I don't know. Let me know what you think and why you think car values are actually dropping so much. Now let's talk about charging. Now, where I live, there are lots and lots of houses that have no off-street parking and therefore would struggle to actually have their own personal charger. Only a couple of locations exist in this area where public charges are. So if you've got such few public charges, why, if I was going to change a car right now, living in one of those houses, why on earth would I just go and buy an electric car? It would just become a bit of a pain. Would I want to take that kind of risk? How quickly is the charging network going to improve in my area? And if I have to go into a car park to charge the car up, well, first of all, is there going to be a queue there? Does it work? Do I have to pay for the parking? There's so many questions about this. And if it's a mile away, I've got to somehow get there and get back and then go back and pick it up after a few hours of charging. And people see it all as a bit of a step backwards, I'm sure. Now, it's the same story on a city scale too. If you look at the number of charges that are around, it's actually very patchy. So can you risk that short-term pain? And I'm not sure people are actually quite ready for that yet. Now, maybe the government should do more. Maybe they are the ones who need to bust all these myths. So who is pushing us into EVs and why? Well, let's look at legislation and start with the Euro 7 legislation. Now, periodically, the European Union brings out these emissions legislations, diktats if you want to call them that, governing cars and what they emit out the tailpipe. Now, the Euro 6, which is what we're in right now, is actually already very tight, but Euro 7 takes things to a different level. The key thing that is happening with Euro 7 is that it's actually reducing or limiting the amount of nitrous oxide that's emitted from a car to less than 16 milligrams per kilometre. Now, NOx is really bad for the respiratory system, and I think it's a really good thing to be getting things like that out from the local air that we breathe. And very old diesels aren't great for that. So if you do own a very old diesel, you're going to find it's not ULEZ compliant and it's going to become quite antisocial as a result of this sort of stuff. But Euro 7 also brings in things like limits for tyre and brake wear particles. I mean, did you know that that was even a thing that's being considered? Well, they're doing that. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But of course, all of these things mean that car manufacturers and the makers of brake discs and pads and all the rest of it, all the associated industries, have to start thinking about what's coming in these Euro legislation type things, these diktats, and they have to start building the requisites into new designs and launches of their products leading up to any Euro directive that's coming in. Let me give you an example of the sort of stuff that's come in recently. Now, if you own a modern diesel, you might be aware of something called AdBlue. AdBlue is a chemical that you have to put into a separate tank in your car, and what the car engine does is it mixes that with diesel and then it breaks down the NOx into nitrogen and water, which is not harmful. So there are some benefits of these things, but they all add cost and they all mean redevelopment and all the rest of it. And of course, car manufacturers have perfected, petrol and diesel engines over decades and decades, but all these little things are now coming in and making them incredibly complicated and very difficult and very costly to manufacture and produce. So new cars that are sold right now in early 2025 will probably already be compliant or will be modified or phased out by July 2025 when Euro 7 comes in. So what about government legislation then here in the UK? Well, locally, we've all heard about ULEZ and what that actually means for us. It's just a way for the councils to limit the number of cars that are coming in there. Then if you start looking a little bit wider than that, there have been some global climate accords which have led to something called the Zero Emissions Vehicle Mandate, or the ZEV mandate. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but you will have heard about, the ban of petrol and diesel cars from 2035. Well, the ZEV mandate has actually brought that target in. It came in from the Global Net Zero Initiative. Now, it doesn't actually apply, believe it or not, to any makers of cars that sell less than 2,500 cars here in the UK. For example, like Ferrari, who are making or bringing out a model right now called the 12 Cylindri. It's actually a 12-cylinder petrol-engined car. I mean, the irony for the rich is just, well, it's mind-boggling really, isn't it? But most developed countries have adopted this ZEV mandate, and that includes countries like China and the USA. Now, the ZEV mandate was introduced last January in 2024, and it states that 22% of new cars must be battery electric vehicles. That 22% ramps up to 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. Now, Labour's manifesto promise was to bring that 2035 target back down to 2030, and that's what's being mooted right now. It's come under some very, very heavy criticism. It's led to a new consultation. I mean, that's what always happens, doesn't it? We've now got a consultation. Now, surely that you'd think that they'd do a consultation and a proper real one before plonking a date into a manifesto, wouldn't you? Well, maybe not. I don't know. It's governments, isn't it? Who knows how they operate? It's all dark arts as far as I'm concerned. Now, the ZEV mandate is punitive too. there is a penalty of up to £15,000 per engine vehicle that's sold over and above the target. So if you don't hit your target of 22%, guess what? You're going to have to pay £15,000 per vehicle, or up to £15,000 per vehicle that doesn't have an electric battery in there or has got an engine in there over and above that target. Now, manufacturers can bank any excess if they overachieve their target or sell it onto others. So, for example, Tesla, who I'm sure you know is a 100% electric car company, could sell its overachievement to another manufacturer. And incidentally, I do love you all with my heart, but I'm not going to do the salute. Now, manufacturers that are it's just ridiculous, isn't it, what happened there? But manufacturers that are struggling to meet that 22% EV target could decide to reduce or even periodically stop the manufacture of engine cars to keep them below the target that's been set for their battery electric cars. Now, that would effectively shrink their engined car business altogether, wouldn't it? But then maybe that's what the directive wants to achieve, doesn't it, I suppose? It's just that people might stop buying petrol engine cars, run their existing cars longer and not buy an electric car. And I think there is a serious risk of that happening. Now, it's leading to a closure of engine car production lines at Vauxhall in the UK, and that's got the potential of job losses. Now, you might find that they're going to have to augment later elsewhere to increase or ramp up battery electric vehicle in the future. Or you'd think in sidestep with closing down a petrol engined or petrol or diesel engine car production line. But that augmentation for a battery vehicle, is that going to happen in the UK? Or are they going to move their production out somewhere else? You just don't know. And what we could be doing is shooting ourselves in the foot. Now, when talking about the ZEV mandate on their website, the government states, I'm going to read this out, following extensive consultation with industry and manufacturers, the mandate provides them with the certainty they have called for to safeguard skilled British jobs. Well, the economic impact of the Vauxhall closure could be £310 million, I've read, just on Luton alone. Now, I don't really get how that's safeguarding jobs at all. And at the same time, grants and EV subsidies have gone for buying an electric car. And even where they exist, they might not be 100%. So, for example, landlords can only claim up to 75% with a maximum of £350 towards the cost of a charge point. Why can't they just make it 100% or have a higher limit? Because you can't really get a decent enough charger for £350, but maybe they don't care about that. Now, vehicle excise duty or road tax on EVs is being introduced from April 2025 too. And the benefit in kind company car tax break, if you want to call it that, which was set at 2% for a little while now, is going to go up to 9% by 2028. And it starts this year, ramping up. Now, in October 2023, the government at the time issued their zero emissions vehicle mandate and CO2 regulations cost benefit analysis. The link to that document is in the description of this video, and you can read it at your own leisure. It aims to clarify the government's rationale, and it talks about why the government is doing what it's doing. It mentions legal implications if the UK fails what has been mandated. So really, you've got to sort of think about this, that maybe the government, with the accords that they've signed up to, could be in some legal difficulties if they don't meet these requirements. So I suppose the question is it realistic and achievable to get 100% battery electric vehicle car sales by 2035 at the latest, let alone 2030, as per the manifesto promise? I suppose engine cars on the road after that are going to, pay a huge penalty. So if you do run your petrol or diesel engine cars beyond 2030 or 35, expect tax and fuel duty cost rises. You've got to really, haven't you? But please let me know in the comments what you think and whether this is all pie in the sky and whether these things are really going to materialise or not. I'd love to know what people think about what's going on and specifically what you think. Now, did you know that China and the USA have also agreed ZEV mandate targets too? Now, they are obviously the biggest polluters probably on the planet. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the SMMT, publish regular statistics on car sales. You can see them on their website, and I look at it quite often because it's really, really interesting. Now, our outturn against the target of 22% was 19.6%. Now, that 19.6% doesn't seem right, does it, when you consider that 1 in 10 car sales was to private individuals, like I said earlier? Well, I think that higher figure is driven by the larger proportional take-up of battery electric vehicles by businesses. I think that's the only thing you can assume there. Now, is this why there are some spectacular deals on EVs right now because they need to shift more of them. They didn't achieve it in 2024, and 2025 is unlikely to be that much better. So they would rather discount EVs by 10k, as I said earlier, rather than pay the £15,000 fine on an engine car. I mean, is that the sort of thing that's going on? Is that the desperation that's going on within this industry right now? Now, you can see some amazing deals advertised by the Chinese company called BYD, and they really, really do look like great deals because their cars seem very, very good. I've had a good look at the BYD Seal. I've got to say, it's a fantastically well put together car, certainly by the way it looks. Now, the value of those discounts that they gave in 2024 to encourage take-up, if you like, of battery electric vehicles to hit the target, guess what they were? It was £4.5 billion worth of discounts in 2024. That's completely unsustainable for an industry. I just don't think they can give that kind of discount again. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in 2025. We talked about public charging earlier, but the government is working with local councils through an initiative called AUX, On-Street Residential Charge Point Scheme, I think is what it stands for. But they've now closed that scheme to new applicants. Now, I believe it's funded through something called the Levy Fund, Local Electric Vehicle Initiative, I think is what it stands for. And that fund is there to try and create a plan to introduce low power charging curbside. Now, even if there was a charger on the street, there probably wouldn't be one for every car or every household. So would people get that pandemic bog roll mentality, certainly at the start of all of this, and just start hogging chargers unnecessarily in case they need it, driven by range anxiety and the fact that they are low power? I mean, what does low power mean? We don't know yet. They haven't actually said whether it's going to be 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt, or 10 kilowatt. We just don't know that at this stage. And there were rumours that they were going to work from things that pop out the curbs or run from lampposts. Well, there aren't that many lampposts on the street anyway, so that would be interesting, wouldn't it, to see how that would work. Now, there isn't enough detail, like I say, so we don't know when it's going to happen, we don't know what's going to happen, but it sounds like a major national infrastructure project run by individual councils from dedicated pots of limited funding. We're not great at major national infrastructure projects as it is, and if you then start going council by council with limited funds, I just don't know where that's going to lead to. But, you know, we should be hopeful that at least the government is doing something about it, and we should wait and see. I think we should park our judgment rather than jumping to judgment right now. Now, it was the Tories that were in charge during the initial industry consultations when the ZEV mandate targets were being pulled together. So I started looking at what the private sort of sector companies were doing. I mean, after all, the Tory ideology has always been that when central government cannot or will not do something, well, they expect private companies to come in and do it. Now, for Leicester as a whole, the story is not as good as I had hoped. My local area is absolutely terrible. There are only a couple of places where we could go and charge a car, and they've only got a couple of chargers in each one, so it's not brilliant. Central London looks a little bit better, but then you would expect that, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, it should be brilliant given that there's ULEZ. Now, of course, it doesn't show private chargers, of which there could be tens of thousands, right? So on the back of all of this, I looked at a company called PodPoint. Now, they are a major provider of charger points here in the UK, and the company PodPoint was actually pointed out to me by one of my subscribers who messaged me the other day and said, have a look and see what's happening at PodPoint. Well, guess what? They have announced a huge drop in profits due to a lack of demand for EVs and their charging facilities. Now, this is at a time when you'd expect that business to be booming, wouldn't you? I mean, their share price has taken a bit of a tumble as a result of this. So if you've invested money in PodPoint, you could be looking at a little bit of a lower return at the moment. Could you just rely on chargers at work or at a supermarket or a shopping centre? Is there a queuing protocol if they are busy, or will being pensioners or having a small child mean that you can actually jump the queue? What if people are hogging them, their car's completely full, but they've still got it plugged in? How much will it cost? Is it regulated? Will it work at a decent enough speed? And is the app telling you the truth, or is it lying about what's available and what's working? And this all sounds negative, but doing my own research has left me with many questions. So what would it cost to run an electric car? Well, it's time for my man maths, so please bear with me on this. Now, we do about 500 miles per month. About 80% of that is town driving, and then we've got the occasional A-road and motorway blast thrown in there. But generally speaking, on average, 6,000 miles a year, roughly 500 miles per month. Now, our soon-to-be 10-year-old 1.6 litre petrol 118i achieves about 27 miles to the gallon, which doesn't seem very high at all. You're always stuck in traffic around where we are, and the sort of journeys that we actually carry out are usually at the peak times of the day. Now, it has an 11.5 gallon tank, and fuel costs near me are roughly £6.25 per gallon. So it's just over £70 to fill it up. Now, tank full will give me about 300 miles of range at most. So I'm filling the car up once or twice a month, basically. Monthly fuel costs would be, it's easy to work this out, 500 miles, which is how much we do, divided by the miles per gallon. Okay, so 500 divided by 27 is 18.5 gallons. So to do 500 miles, we need 18.5 gallons at £6.25 a gallon. So that's £115 per month. Now, if I take the £115 and divide that by the number of miles that we do in the month, it's 23 pence. So the car costs us about 23p to run per mile. So let's take a hypothetical EV that we might buy with, say, a 75 kilowatt hour battery and a 250 mile real world range. And we'd be charging that on a night tariff at, say, 7 pence per kilowatt hour. Now, to keep it simple, I'm not including additional costs for things like the slightly higher day rate that normally goes with an EV tariff. Because we will work from home, the chances are we're going to be using quite a lot of electricity through the day. And obviously that would offset some of the savings we're making at night, but I'm going to try and just remove that just for the purposes of simple calculations. So please bear with me on that, and I hope you understand why I'm doing that. So if we take a 75 kilowatt hour battery at 7 pence, it's £5.25. Simple calculation, 7 pence times 75, £5.25 for a 250 mile range. So if I double that up, 250, make it 500, which is what we do in a month, it's going to cost us £10.50. Okay, to do 500 miles. The basic calculation here is 500 miles a month at a cost of £10.50. It would cost us about 2 pence per mile. So actually, rather than paying 23 pence, we're now going to be paying just over 2p per mile. We've actually saved 90% of our travel costs, just like that. It's a saving of around £104 per month. And that could be used, of course, to go towards a finance deal if we were going to finance an EV. Or insurance, as EVs generally cost more to insure. Or go out for a meal once a month. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Thank you, car. Anyway, public charge points and rapid chargers can be relatively expensive at between sort of 40 and 90 pence per kilowatt hour. So you can see in the calculation that it could be quite expensive if you're relying purely on public charging. It could cost anything between £30 and £67 from this calculation here for a 250 mile range with a 75 kilowatt hour car. It's not the 300 miles that we were getting with the petrol cars, it's actually costing more. Now, the investigation reaffirms the conventional wisdom that an EV makes a great mode of transport for people with access to private charging and cover less miles in a day than the actual minimum of the car. I should just go and buy one, shouldn't I, really? Well, what else is coming along? I think we should really look, and I said earlier that there are other things that are around the corner that actually might help us out here. JCB, who make construction and agricultural equipment vehicle, have successfully converted conventional diesel engines to run on hydrogen. They've now actually got sign-off and licensing from several EU countries. Now, they've done this because customers need their machinery to be operating 24/7 potentially and running shifts, and a battery just wouldn't work. The batteries would go flat, they'd be charging these things up constantly. So companies have said, look, this ain't going to work, you need to give us a better solution for this, and JCB have risen to that challenge. This is pure innovation here in the UK. Okay, now hydrogen is reportedly the most abundant thing in the universe. So what about converting road vehicle combustion engines to run on hydrogen? Surely that can be done if JCB have done it. Well, several manufacturers are looking into doing that very thing, including Kawasaki, Hyundai, Toyota, and many others. And incidentally, I don't know whether it's Hyundai, I don't know what it is, so I don't know. Anyway, very simplistically put, electrical energy is combined with water to cause a reaction to release the hydrogen, which is, well, it's captured in a vessel. Now, this is all done inside a controlled thing. Do not, please, please, please do not try this at home. I don't want you putting electrical cables into into water. That isn't going to work. The outcome isn't going to be great. I don't know that from first-hand experience, but I've heard from a friend that you can get killed by doing certain things. So don't do it. So why not just So why not just put the electric current into a battery instead? I suppose there's a valid argument for that, isn't there? Why would you go to the middleman, hydrogen, when you can just take electricity and put it straight into a battery and run the car? There is an argument for that. But I suppose you could argue, though, that at least with hydrogen power, you don't need to have all this public charging network malarkey put in. You just need to convert your petrol stations to use hydrogen. It takes 5 minutes to fill up. And the way the world works today would carry on working. And that would be quite nice, wouldn't it? People don't like change, especially when it actually affects you adversely. Then people really do take umbrage. Well, BMW and Toyota are also working together with hydrogen, and they're trying to make a hydrogen fuel cell car. Now, Toyota already have one called the Mirai. Now, in these, a chemical reaction releases electrical energy which drives a motor in a car. Now, you could argue that it's a little bit having an electric car, but it's just got hydrogen going in there to run a motor rather than a battery running a motor. Now, they're planning to launch cars from around 2028, which is only 3 years away. So do we all just keep running an engined car for a bit longer now and see what happens? Do we just get whatever we want now? Or do we get a Toyota Mirai fuel cell car knowing that hydrogen is going to become more available? Because it's not that well available at the minute. There's only a few, sort of filling stations in the whole country. And then what about carbon neutral or synthetic fuels? Companies like Co2 are making sustainable fuels here in the UK. And there's a great video from Harry Metcalf from Harry's Garage on his on YouTube where he talks about a way of actually taking or creating bioethanol from food and then creating or constructing a 94 RON gasoline fuel from that. Now, F1 will be moving to that type of technology soon, or that type of fuel soon, and it would mean that the internal combustion engine could live on together with existing supply and filling mechanisms. Now, that's a great thing, isn't it? That would really help everybody out. So it makes you think that EVs might be an interim step to other ways of powering transport. We just don't really know. I mean, do the governments need to support R&D in these sorts of technologies a bit more rather than forcing the EV story? I mean, the phrase "more to do here" comes to mind, and I think that's the only thing I can say really on that. Now, you see, I think people don't like to spend huge sums of money on developing technology. It's not like a £1,000 mobile phone where if it goes wrong, you just get another one if the technology's changed or whatever. But buying an expensive item like a car for tens of thousands of pounds using hardwired batteries is always going to give you the impression that one day it's going to stop working on you, or you get the range anxiety or whatever it is that goes on. And no one wants to regularly lose 1 hour of life charging an expensive rapid charger when you can spend the same amount of money and fill up in 5 minutes. And as a car enthusiast, would I miss anything? Well, I did say at the start of this episode that there may be a way of running a really cool engine car without any of the drawbacks or the penalties that we've talked about here. Did you know that you can buy a V8 or a V12 and keep running it after the ZEV mandate has come in and not face any penalties? Well, you can, as long as it's over 40 years old. Now, that's something that any of us can actually go out and do. And you know something? I have a great big regret that I want to share with you. I sold 2 years ago my BMW 635 CSI E24 Sharknose. How I missed that car. I wish I'd kept it now. I should have had the foresight to see this was coming and held on to it. Never mind. Car prices have rocketed for those now as a result of all of this and the fact that they are becoming really, really in demand. So trying to get back into one of those is not going to be easy. Now, the people I know who own EVs love them. They absolutely adore them. But of course, the other option is to go down hybrid or plug-in hybrid, which one or two of them have actually gone to as a result of not getting on with an electric car. So there is that option still. So I think I need to go and drive a few more to be sure. Maybe on an extended test drive and take you along with me. I don't want to buy a brand new car, but if you can think of a car that would fit my sort of needs, then please let me know. Share your experience of what running an EV is like. Leave your comments below, please. I'd really, really love to hear your feedback on this. Now, if you're still watching this video, then you will have hopefully enjoyed it or got something from it. So please hit that thumbs up button. We're a very, very small channel still with great aspirations for 2025, but we can only do that with your support. I'd love to know what you think of this video. Please let me know in the comments below. And please make sure that you subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you for the question that came in initially, which started this whole journey, and I really, really appreciate you watching and taking the time out to watch us on this. So I'm going to check out now, and we will see you on the next one.